I don't think anybody predicted it right from the word go. He'd been the coach previously, and he'd moved up. And obviously, you never quite know how someone who's promoted to have full responsibility is going to respond. But Johnny was absolutely terrific. He had such an aura of positivity about him. I thought he was a great communicator. And I remember it might have been, probably, I think it probably would have been the start of his first full season, which would have been 75, 76. When I got in touch with him, it must have been beginning of August or something. And they were reporting for pre-season training. And he had this idea of getting the players to run up and down the sand dunes in Morton, as I think that was the first day of pre-season training, the first thing they did. And I said, can I come down and do a little feature on what you're doing with the lads? And he said, yes, come down. And then he said, bring your trainers. I thought, oh, heck. So I turned up with a photographer, and he had me with my trainers on, and he had me running up and down the sand dunes with the players. And he had a stopwatch, and he was timing us. And of course, it was absolutely brilliant, because this gave me a completely different aspect of the feature I was going to write. And it was ideal from the photographer's point of view, because he was getting shots of me puffing and blowing alongside these professional football players. And of course, Johnny knew that. Johnny realised that this would be a fantastic way to attract attention, that it would give something extra to the coverage. And I always remember that it was an absolutely brilliant day. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I remember another time, totally different kind of story with Johnny. Rovers were playing Crewe. At the time, Crewe were a really tough team. They didn't play much artistic football. It was, very much kind of just concentrate on getting results and don't worry too much about the entertainment. And the manager was John Manning, who was an ex-Tranmere player. He was manager of Crewe at the time. And I'd written a preview, and I'd made some fairly critical comments about Crewe's style. And after the game, I was in the dressing room corridor waiting to interview Johnny. Johnny was chatting to John Manning, and John Manning was having a right go at this character from the Echo, who had written this, what he thought was a very insulting preview about the style of his team, and who was this reporter anyway. And I'm standing there trying to shrink into the background, hoping he doesn't recognise me. John Manning didn't know me from Adam. And I tell you what, a lot of football managers would have said, oh, well, here he is, he's right here. But Johnny didn't do that. Johnny knew perfectly well I was there. He knew all about it. He just kept quiet. He kind of watched my back on that occasion. And that was down to just having a good relationship with him. And that's something else which I've never forgotten.
I want to talk a little bit more about that relationship with him in a moment. But that day you went up the sand dunes, were you fitter than any of the players? Were some of them lagging behind you?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. No. I mean, I was fitter than I certainly am now, because I was 24, 25, something like that. So I was reasonably fit. I was playing a lot of squash and things like that in those days. But no, I mean, these were all good lads, proper professionals who knew what they were doing, unlike me.
And you described him as a great communicator, which is something he's famous for. If you go to his second spell in charge, there are many, many quotes and nicknames that he gave players that stuck. I mean, the name of this podcast is one of them. He said he'd take Tranmere on a trip to the moon. Was he like that in his first spell in charge as well? Was he someone who just always gave brilliant copy?
Yeah, I think so. I think he was just his natural self. He had a confidence about him. He had ambition as well. He wanted to play decent football as well as winning football. And I think that he understood that the example you set when you're in a position of leadership counts for a heck of a lot, because it infiltrates through the entire organisation, whether it's a football club or anything else. The person at the top and their attitude is really important, because that influences everybody else's attitude. And I think he did a heck of a lot to establish Tranmere as a really positive football club that was going places.
And is that something, in terms of his attitude to the media and the way he approached them, is that something that I mean, obviously it has changed, but did you see it changing through your career as a journalist to the point we have now, where most managers, if you interview a manager post-match, they say nothing of any interest. You can always script what they're going to say. Whereas if you interviewed a Johnny King back in the day, I imagine you weren't really sure what he was going to come out with.
No, that's true. Johnny was always great to talk to. I think one of the I'm not sure if it's a difficulty or not, but one aspect of media coverage of sport in general at the top level, football in particular, is that it's not difficult for reporters to get quotes from managers and coaches, because there are now formal press conferences before every event and after every event, and every accredited journalist just has to turn up and they've got their quotes. Back in the 1970s, the 1980s, it just wasn't like that. There was nothing really formal, so it was really down to you to establish a relationship with a football manager, so that if you said, can you just spare me a couple of minutes for a few comments about the game, they're more likely to say yes than no. So that kind of thing was important. So whereas it's easier for reporters these days, the hard part is getting something that is exclusive and original to yourself. You turn up to a press conference, yes, you get the quotes, but everybody else has got exactly the same quotes. And as a journalist, what you really want to do is get something that's exclusive to you. Nobody else has got it. And that's where relationships come in. With Johnny, it was quite straightforward establishing that kind of relationship. I didn't always have that kind of relationship. I had a very patchy relationship with Bob Paisley when he was manager of Liverpool for quite a long while. But that's by the by. But you couldn't take it for granted as a journalist. And also, because managing a football club is so high profile and it's so stressful, if something goes wrong, it doesn't take much for that channel of communication to be cut off. And if you've not got access to quotes and comments from the football club and you're in charge of covering that football club, you've got a problem then as a reporter.